I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm going to be doing a library check-in. I think it's been about like a month or two since I've done one of these, and the books that ended up dominating a lot of my time from that last batch of books were the books that I had checked out for the BookTube prize. So those were a lot of nonfiction books. And so to make that happen, I also ended up kind of putting off some books until a later date or DNFing them. Kind of related to that, one of the things that I had talked about in my last video was how I was starting to feel sort of overwhelmed by all of the books I had been checking out from the library lately. And a lot of you have apparently experienced this. Like, you've had that experience of putting a bunch of books on hold at the library and thinking like, they'll get to me one day, but like that's for future me to worry about. But then it turns out future you is suddenly having to deal with like 10 books coming in off of hold like at once, and you're just like, well, crap, like I don't know how I'm gonna read all of these, right? So yeah, thank you guys for commiserating with me on that. But Rincey from Rincey Reads, she mentioned that she like does this thing where she has like a full-on schedule of like how she pauses or suspends her hold so that they will become active on particular dates. And she spaces them out in a particular way so that she knows like she will be able to manage her reading load. And Rincey is wise in all things. So I have decided to start like sort of implementing that. I have not come to a fully thought out system yet. For now, I am trying to kind of space them out so I have like 3 or 4 books that I am unpausing every month so that like I can hopefully stagger them a little bit more and just like, you know, exercise a little bit more restraint. Because also sometimes you put books on hold because in the moment they're exciting and then they come in and you're like, meh. And so like even in this one month, I've had that experience of like I put a book on hold and then like had it set for a later unsuspend date. And then, you know, like a few weeks later, returned to it and been like, actually, you know what? I don't want to read that book. And so I think this is like hopefully going to work out for me so that I'm managing my reading a little bit more like smartly, intelligently, or at least a little bit less recklessly. I think it's going to take me a little bit of time to make sure I'm getting like the pacing and the scheduling right and to see like what works. But yes, thank you, Rincey, for teaching me, again, how to be better at books. So the way that I structure these videos, I first quickly go over the books that I had checked out last time that I talked about in my last video, and go through like what I read, what I didn't read, some quick thoughts about those books, and then I'm gonna be talking about the books that I have currently checked out and that I will hopefully be reading over the next few weeks. As I said, the big chunk of my reading was for the BookTube prize. So for that, as I talked about in the last video, I had checked out The Address Book by Deirdre Mask, Surviving Autocracy by Masha Gessen, Just Us by Claudia Rankin, Intimations by Zadie Smith. I also ended up somehow miraculously, I have no idea how, getting Barack Obama's memoir, A Promised Land, from the library. I still have no idea how I got off of the holds list. I think probably it was just because it was like through my local library instead of through the loose library network where I was like number 200 out of like a bajillion or something on hold. So I feel like that's what happened. But even then, like I know my library is small, my town is small, but I was still like amazed that I got it. But I'm glad that I got it because I ended up going back and forth between the audiobook and the physical book to finish it on time because it is a giant book. I did a full video talking about each of these books and how I felt about that, so I will link to that down below if you want to hear more about these books. The next 2 books I'm going to talk about, I'm going to just talk about together because they were both DNFs for me. The first is A Touch of Stone and Snow by Milla Vane, and the second is Merciful Crow by Margaret Owens. A Touch of Stone and Snow is a book that I feel like has been popping in and out of these library check-ins because it's a book that's in the series that like I read the first book and kind of had mixed feelings about it, but I was sort of excited for this one because it had this like specific premise of like a friend who's put another friend in exile and now has to like hang out again and they're gonna fall in love again. I was like very excited for this whole exile second chance romance aspect to it, and it is a barbarian romance, which is not like a part of romance that I read a whole lot of, so I was excited to go a little bit more into the series, but I'd also had reservations based on the first book. And I think going into this book, some of the aspects of the first book that I like didn't like weren't there anymore, but then it turned out there were all these other things that I still was like, I don't know, I don't think this series is for me. And I gave it like a few chapters and I didn't hate it. Like it wasn't like I had a strong negative reaction. It was more just like realizing that I was committing myself to 300 more pages of like people like getting a boner just like from standing next to someone, or like this weird like kind of like mystical virginity ritual thing that it seems like this series has baked into it that like is weird on its own, but like also just kind of I find annoying because it mostly seems to exist not to actually fetishize virginity, but to actually just like serve as a weird like plot device, and I just don't like it. So I just kind of decided like, you know what, like I could finish this book and I would probably like be at a sort of like 3-4 star rating kind of with it, but I don't like, I had all these other books that I had to read, and I just was like, why would I kind of like set aside time for this when I'm just not really enjoying it a lot in the moment. With The Merciful Crow, I only made it, I think, like a chapter in. It starts off right in the middle of the action, which is not a thing I necessarily dislike. In fact, it's something that in theory I actually quite enjoy. I like the idea of just being like, hey, we're all in, things are bonkers, let's just go for it. I think what's hard is that a lot of times books that start right in the middle of the action, they also have to figure out how they're gonna do all these other things they wanna do in that first chapter, whether that's like world building, introducing characters, introducing stakes for the stories. Like there are all of these other aspects that are also being like potentially crammed in there. And so I think the books that most effectively throw you right into the middle of the action are the ones that pick only 1 or 2 of those other things to also do. And they trust like the audience and the rest of the chapters to actually kind of figure out how to do the rest. And like they will give a little bit of time and breathing room to build out the world and build out the characters and build out the stakes and the premise and everything. But this was a book where the first chapter for me felt like it was trying to do all of those things at once, and I just could not get into it. And I felt like coming off of that first chapter, I was like, I just don't think I can handle a book of this. Like I just don't think I'm the right person to enjoy this story. I think it's going to appeal to people who are very drawn to strong premises, but like if you are someone who also wants a little bit more breathing room in your writing, this is probably not the right book for you either. The next book is technically a book that I haven't finished, but I do not consider it a DNF because I definitely plan to return to it, and this is Kindred by Octavia Butler. It was just that because of all of those other books I had to finish, and also just like I had a few weeks just like pretty rough work-wise and mentally where I just like was not in a good headspace to read something that was like so like anxiety inducing. I just did not get a chance to finish it, but I'm definitely planning on checking this book out again and also checking out more of Octavia Butler's books. And I think this is kind of an interesting counterpoint to what I was just talking about with Merciful Crow, where like Kindred does also throw you right into the middle of the action, but I think Butler is just so like effective at understanding like kind of what different things she needs to balance. So like you know a little bit about the characters, but not that much. You learn more about them later on because she's really good at like focusing in on like what you most immediately need in that first initial set of scenes to feel like the tension and like the horror of what's going on, and then introducing more of the character details later so that like that elevates some of the like the stakes on a personal level that like are just as important of everything else, like the immediacy of everything else, like every other threat that's going on, but just like builds on that. Like she's really effective at how she spaces these things out so that each moment is still so full, but it builds like different aspects when they're connected to each other. And it is maybe like a little bit unfair to compare because like Merciful Crow is taking place in a fantastical world. So part of the work of that first chapter is building up that fantastical world. Something like a Kindred where like the story is focused on this character who is traveling back in time without knowing how she's doing it to a plantation, and she is a Black woman. So that is like many different forms of terror like wrapped together. Like there is like a lot of stuff you don't necessarily have to lay explicitly out because like that is a part of our world. That is not a new world that you're building. So I mean, I guess to the extent that like I feel like it's unfair to compare them, that would be it. But I do think that there's still something very masterful about how like Butler builds the world of this book in a way that like jumps you right into the action, leaves a lot of mystery, but also leaves you wanting to know more about the characters and wanting to know more about the plot and figure out what's going on. And that just like feels like it trusts the audience a little bit more and like understands the role of space in that. So last up from the books that I talked about last time is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. And I did also get The Winter of the Witch after, which I just finished reading last night. And these are part of her Baron Nightingale series. I really loved this. I think like a lot of people, I really enjoyed this series. And I think in particular, the thing that for me just like was pure catnip was like the way that it's written in this sort of like oldie, like kind of like fairy tale sort of voice. Like there's just something about that style of writing that if you put anything in that form, I'm like, yep, I'm good. You can write anything. I will think it's good. And I know that's completely superficial, but like that is just the human that I am. And it's just so evocative, and it really does make you feel like you're drawn into this world of magic and winter, but there's also this really like dry sense of humor that pops in that like kind of perfectly balances it and like still points out like, you know, like it would be a little bit absurd if the world were actually like this. And it's that kind of stuff is for me just like super fun, and I love it. I do also think, with that said, that the writing style hides a multitude of sins. I don't know, maybe not a multitude of sins, but like definitely like some possible transgressions. Like I was thinking about it this morning because I had finished reading Winter of the Witch last night, and I was like thinking about it this morning, and I was thinking about like how there were all of these plot points throughout this trilogy that like on their own, just like if I thought about them completely divorced from everything else about this book, and especially thinking about it divorced from the writing style, like I would think that they were really silly. Like there are things just like that happen, then get reversed, then that happen again, then get reversed, but like mostly just for the whims of the plot, it feels like. And there's not really sense to me that like the plot points have to happen this way. It kind of just feels like they do. And same with like some of the revelations where you're kind of like, okay, like sure, I guess. I think this is supposed to hit harder, but just the way that it's executed is like not really that like revealing in any kind of way where I'm like, oh shit, like wow. And it's really just because of the way that they're written, then you're like, oh, this must be important. But I don't actually feel the weight of that importance a lot of the time. But like the writing just kind of smoothed over those edges for me, where like, yeah, those are things that I would usually complain about in a lot of books, but for me and the things that I liked about the writing, I just didn't care. It made me think kind of Mad Max Fury Road, which like I feel like is like, you know, as a movie, like if you wrote out the key plot points in that movie and like wrote like their timestamps with them too, like you just like had the skeleton of like what the plot structure was for the movie, you'd be like, this doesn't make sense. Like this can't be a movie. Like this, you can't do that. Like you can't have a plot that's like, we're gonna go from here to here and then go back there just because. And that is the thing. We're just doing that, you know? But as a movie, it works because it does it with both so much style and with so much clarity about the characters and why the plot is happening that way, that like you're like, okay, yeah, I'm in, I'm sold, I'm here for it. And I think that's kind of how I feel about these books too, where it like feels like if I wrote out the key plot points and just like wrote that skeleton plot, I'd be like, this doesn't make sense. But because of the way it's written and the way it builds the characters and the way it builds their relationships with each other, especially I love the way that Vazia's relationships with her family developed over the course of the trilogy. And my only complaint in a way is that I wish there was more of that. Like I loved it and I just really enjoyed it. So now on to the books that I currently have checked out from the library. So first up, I have 3 books that I am considering my current like space opera set of books. I am not a space person. I don't know when space operas became a thing that I was like, I'm gonna read this, because I am personally, like I enjoyed Star Wars and that's sort of the extent to which I'm like, cool, it's space, but like I am just not a space person. But here we are reading potentially 3 books set in space. So the first one is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, and this is a book that's gotten a lot of hype recently. I think it was recently released. It's a romance. I think at least 2 of these are romances. It's a romance, and I think there's like political intrigue and whatnot. And again, the space is there with the love. So I'm gonna read it and I'm gonna see how it stacks up against all that hype. I've also got Polaris Rising by Jessie Mahalik. So I had talked about reading another one of her series, well, the first book in one of her series recently, The Queen's Gambit. And I had talked about how I wasn't super crazy about it, but there was also like enough stuff going on in that series where I was kind of intrigued. So some people commented and said that they had not read The Queen's Gambit, but that they had really enjoyed this series by her. And I think part of it is because these books are longer. Like I think one of my challenges with The Queen's Gambit is that the book itself was just short and didn't have enough space for the space that was going on. I'm funny. I'm not funny. The point, anyways. So yeah, I'm gonna be reading this book to see, and I really fucking love these covers. I'm such a sucker for a good cover, and I think the space books have good covers. That's how they get you, with the covers. And then last is gonna be Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliott. I'm pretty sure I've read one of her series before and I enjoyed it. And I'm completely blanking on how I found out about this series, but I am gonna read it. I wish I had a better explanation for why I'm reading it. I think it's mostly just that I am in this place of checking out space operas and was like, this one seems like it's got the political intrigue that I want, so I'm gonna read it. So that's why I have it. On a very, very different note, I have the posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas by Machado de Assis checked out. I've had this book on hold for like a really long amount of time, like I think for months, and then I ended up having to pause it for a little while because I needed to make sure I got some other reading done. Part of the reasons why I've had this on hold for a while is that last year The Artisan Geek did this really great video called Black Classics I know you've never heard of, and this was one of the books she talked about, and she pretty much had me as soon as she talked about the fact that it's like dedicated, like what was it? Oh, the dedication's amazing. It's from the point of view of the narrator. To the worm that first gnawed at the cold flesh of my cadaver, I dedicate as a fond remembrance these posthumous memoirs. That is, as soon as I heard that, I was like, I'm sold. Like, I'm into it. I need to read it. And I know for me, like, I am bad enough with classics as it is, and I am even worse with classics that come from outside the US. Machado de Assis was from Brazil, and so I have not read much Brazilian literature at all. And so I figure I will start here and work my way from there, basically. Oh, I should also note, this is a translation and it was translated by Flora Thompson DeVoe. Next up is a book that I don't know if I'm gonna read. I don't know where I wasn't, like where my headspace was when I checked this out, but this is a self-help book called Winging It, Why Action Beats Planning Every Time by Emma Isaacs. Subtitle is Stop Thinking, Start Doing. I think, like I said, a few weeks ago, I was just like in a bad mental headspace. And like part of my bad mental headspace is often because I overthink things. So I don't even know how I heard about this book, but I was just like, I don't know, seems like I need some cheerleading to be like, stop thinking, you know? So I don't know if I'm gonna read it. It's like, I don't know, it's got good packaging. It's got that very like millennial, like older millennial, like pink thing going on. I feel like my relationship with self-help is that like, it is a genre that I read with a lot of dislike, but also like part of the joy of it is the dislike, but not in like a I'm hate reading it kind of way. But there's something to me about being scolded by people whose writing and whose mentality I dislike that is somehow motivating to me. And I think that might be where I'm at with this book, but I'm not sure. If I end up liking this book, I will take all of those words back. But I think that's where I'm at with this. Last up is Queen of the Conquered by Kacen Callender. This is a book that I think has been talked about quite a bit on BookTube and a lot of other places. And it was one where like based on the reviews of this book, I was kind of like, I don't know, I wasn't sure if it was really something that I was gonna be super interested in. But with the second book that came out, which I think Sam at Thoughts and Tomes did a review on this and like why it was for her, kind of like a little bit of a tough experience reading wise and like a little bit like of a mixed thing because it was like it was like a book that she like didn't want to read like in that form, but also like respected the way that it was done. The things that she didn't like about it were things that like I also know that at some points I would not want to read, but I'm also at a point right now where it is kind of what I want to read. Like it sounds like it's a sort of like cynical take on politics and power, like especially this one I think is supposed to be, and I don't know why, but like I'm in a place where I want cynical takes on politics and power, so I can't imagine why I would want to read that. Like what about 2020 and 2021 would make me want to read that? I mean, the thing is I also understand because there are also times where I don't want to read that, where I'm like, I would like a fictional world where politicians and people in power are not fucking assholes, but I think for right now, I am in the place where I kind of want to explore the ones who are fucking assholes. I don't know if that describes what's going to be happening in this book. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I am curious based on how people have talked about it, how it's going to stack up. So yeah, those are the books that I had checked out from the library and the books that I currently have checked out. If you guys have read any of these books, if you want to tell me about them, let me know down below and let me know how your library reading is going as well. And if you guys have also foolproof ways that you have made sure to manage proactively your library checkouts, let me know as well. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Bye.